Hello dear students. So in this video lecture I'm going to explain you about the section 7 of ICMR 2017 ethical guidelines. So section 7 of ICMR 2017 ethical guidelines is that clinical trials of drugs and other intervention. Clinical trial, I'm writing CT in the short form. So if we look the ICMR 2017 ethical guideline module, if we observe it, then they have given in this section, first they have given the definition of clinical trials, then second they have given some general guidelines for carrying out the clinical trials, then they have discussed about the interventions. Like intervention, it can be drug or vaccine related. Drug and vaccine they have discussed together. Then second, bioavailability. Then they have discussed ethical implication of study design. Then they have discussed about multi-centric trials. Multi-centric trials. Then they have discussed about They have discussed about the medical device, phytopharmaceuticals. They have discussed about. Then they have discussed about device trials. Then biologicals and biosimilars. Biologicals and biosimilars. Then clinical trials with stem cell. 7th, 8th clinical trial CT with stem cell. Then surgical interventions. Then community trials. This public health interventions. Okay, public health interventions, PHI. Then they have discussed about clinical trial interventions, clinical CTI, that's clinical trial interventions in HIV, or you can say AIDS. Then clinical trials on traditional medicine. Clinical trial interventions on traditional medicine, TM. Okay, TM traditional TMS, that's traditional system of medicine. Okay, TSM, traditional system of medicine. Then they have given about clinical trial on traditional medicine system, then trial on diagnostic agents, clinical trial on diagnostic interventions. 14th, that's radioactive materials, clinical trial interventions on radioactive materials like X-ray. Then investigator, here 15th, investigator initiated CT, clinical trials. Clinical trial on contraceptives, 16th, clinical trials on contraceptives. Clinical trials in oncology, pregnancy pregnancy and clinical trials, and clinical trial of product using clinical trial of products using new technology, then synthetic biology, then 17th is synthetic biology. So this is about the outline of section 7 as per ICMR 2017 ethical guideline module. So we will be discussing in this, we will discuss the important things. We will discuss first the definition, guidelines, and we will discuss about the drugs and vaccine, and we will discuss about the bioavailability also, ethical implication of study design, multi-centric trials, and we will discuss about we will discuss also about clinical trials in oncology. And because it's like difficult to discuss each and every part strictly as per this module, but during our research we have to follow these strictly, but for interview or viva, or if you're aspiring like to do PhD in clinical pharmacology, or drug, you're doing drug related any interventions, or any kind of intervention like drug related, vaccine related, nutraceuticals, any kind of interventions. So this is the important here, that's drug and vaccines, bioavailability. Also study design is also important. And if you are, this we will not discuss multicentric trials, and just briefly, if we get time, briefly we will see what's there. And CT in oncology, so we will discuss it. You can take the screenshot of this. So if we look about the definition of clinical trials as per ICMR, so they have defined clinical trial a study or a research that prospectively assigns human participants to one or more health related interventions. And interventions, it could be drugs, vaccine, biologicals, etc., which I mentioned. The ethical guidelines, if we look the ethical guidelines to carry out the clinical trials as per ICMR, so they have mentioned that the clinical trial should be carried in such a way so they ensure DRS and W. DRS means, D means dignity, rights, safety, and well-being. So you can remember this as a mnemonic, that is DRS and W. So dignity, right, safety, and well-being of the participants. And clinical trial should be performed only when it clarify risk and benefit assessment, and benefit should be so benefit, the risk should be less and benefit should be more. And then clinical trial should be carried out as per GCP guidelines, and written voluntary consent from the participants should be taken. And the participants is also the research participants have right to withdraw from research anytime. And if there is the research participants, if the research any kind of vulnerable patients, or we need to take any kind of vulnerable population, then for that we need to take special consents, that is vulnerable populations. Then we need to take, that is we need to take consent from their like in case of child, we need to take consent from the parents, and like that. Okay. And privacy and confidentiality. And the clinical trial should be carried out by qualified person or qualified team, and clinical trial must be approved by ethical committee, and the clinical Trial Registry of India. If there is any spontaneous adverse event, it should be uh, it should be within 24 hours. It should be within 24 hours. It should be reported. Okay, within 24 hours it should be reported to sponsor or ethics committee or any regulatory authority. And free medical management for adverse events, serious adverse events, and compensation should be given for if any adverse event or serious adverse event happened. And then ancillary care, and there should be institutional mechanism for insurance coverage. So these are the ethical guidelines as per ICMR 2017 guidelines. In order to follow, we have to follow these guidelines in order to carry out any kind of clinical trials with respect to any kind of interventions. Interventions I have mentioned here, that's drugs, vaccine, biologicals, phytochemicals, surgical interventions, medical devices, any kind of interventions. Okay, so we have to follow these guidelines while carrying out clinical trials. So you can take the screenshot of this. Then we will go and look specific about the interventions like drugs and vaccine, what the module has mentioned about drugs and vaccine. Then we will look about it. Then we have about as we discussed about first the definition and then guidelines. Then the third thing, the ICMR section 7 of 2017 guidelines is discussing about this like specific interventions, clinical trials with respect to specific intervention. The first intervention they have discussed about the drug or vaccine development. See, the aim of clinical drug or vaccine development is to find out the right dose and schedule. See, this is as per ICMR document. Okay, and like safety and the efficacy of drug or vaccine, and then we have to see the risk and benefit. If the benefit outweighs the risk, then it is a useful intervention. Okay, then they have the ICMR they have discussed about the phases of drug development. Phase 0, if we see the phase 0, it's also called, and they have discussed all these phases like phase 0, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, phase 4, and they are just discussing about the aims, participants, all these things there. And this ICMR section 7 is they have written over there. So I'm going to just I'm delivering this lecture strictly as per ICMR 2017 guidelines. No add-on. Here is no add-on. Okay. So they have in phase 0 they have also discussed this phase 0, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, phase 4. Phase 0, we know it's microdosing. So the aim is to identify the PK. Participant is very few. They have not given any number. That's the healthy participants, and they have mentioned that there is no therapeutic intention. So here no therapeutic intention, and we know this is a microdosing because we are giving in this phase 1 upon 100th of the therapeutic dose. For example, if the therapeutic dose of a drug is 100 mg, then we are giving 1 mg of it in this phase. Okay. Then phase 1, this is called human pharmacology and safety. This they have not given the names also, like alternative names, human pharmacology and safety, therapeutic efficacy, which I have written the alternate names of phase 2, 3, 4. ICMR have not given these. So the aim is that safety and tolerability. The aim is it's the primary aim, safety and tolerability, and then secondary we have that's assessment of pharmacokinetics and assessment of pharmacodynamics. Also, ICMR is not discussing about this participants. This I have taken from the reference from the Goodman and Gilman pharmacology book. But ICMR module is not discussing about the participant number. Okay, and this they have given that this phase is carried on healthy voluntary participants. Then phase 2, the aim is explore therapeutic efficacy, and this phase 2, it is divided in the early phase, that is phase 2A, and the late phase, that is 2B. In the early phase, it is about to estimate the dose response. that's to estimate dose response, or we can say dose selection. And then the late phase to confirm the dose response. Okay, and also here is I have participants or patients, but number ICMR is not mentioning this number. I have taken it from Goodman and Gilman. Then the therapeutic efficacy, phase 3, that's the therapeutic confirmation. The aim is therapeutic confirmation. Primary is to confirm the dose, to confirm the efficacy of a drug in larger number of populations, and the secondary is safety assessment also. So the participants or patients, again this number they have not given, that is 500 3000. And then phase 4 is that post-marketing surveillance. It's about to know rare and long-term ADRs, okay, complication in specific population, children or lactating mother or pregnancy, and this. So the next thing is that first you can take the screenshot of this, then we will discuss the next. So you can take the screenshot of this, then we can discuss about the ethical, that's the ethical considerations with respect to these phases, which ICMR module has given. Then we will discuss briefly this also. Okay, so we can take the screenshot. So the second thing, after phase of clinical trials, the second, that's the second thing they have mentioned about the ethical considerations. See, first one, clinical trials definition was given. In second, that's the second chapter, we can say. Okay, they have given about the aims of drug and vaccine development. And the third, they have discussed, that's the second, they have discussed about the phase, and then this is the first thing that they have discussed under drug and vaccine development. That's the phase of drug development. Okay, and the second thing about phases, they have given the ethical considerations. Okay, regarding the ethical considerations, they have mentioned that all clinical trial, it should be scientifically and ethically sound, and the sponsor, researcher, institution, ethics committee, regulatory authority, they are responsible for carrying the ethically and scientifically sound clinical trial. And before any clinical trial, the researcher or the research team, they're responsible that they should provide adequate preclinical data or preclinical data studies, so that which can indicate that the clinical trial is safe and acceptable. And if we, so this is the general guidelines. Then ICMR also mentions about specific things with respect to phase 1. So with respect to phase 1, they have discussed that phase 1, it should require ethical and regulatory approval, and this ethical and this phase 1, it is non-therapeutic trial. So it's non-therapeutic trial, therefore should conduct in participants who gave voluntary informed consent themselves and written sign. And also this phase 1 is often in healthy participants, but in sometimes it can be conducted in patients, like clinical trial of anti-cancer drugs in cancer patients. And compensation should be given to the healthy to the participants. And this the study protocol should describe the measures to decrease the risk of any kind of risk which are attributed to the phase 1 study. So the protocol should clearly mention that any kind of measures which can decrease any risk related to phase 1. Okay, and then second thing, next we will discuss about see, this is actually a huge topic, and we have to discuss it in in a manner so we can remember it maximum we can remember it. And that's why, see, first the outline was like this. If you see the outline, outline of section 7. Okay. So first, this is the section 7. Section 7 is city of drugs and other interventions. Okay. So first they have discussed about 7.1 is general guidelines, general principles for carrying out a clinical trial, general principle for CT. Okay, this is the 7.1. So this we discussed. Okay, then second, that is the 7.2. So this is actually the portion, or we can say what we can say is like a part. Okay, part. So 7. First part they have given the general principles for carrying out the clinical trial. The second part, that's 7.2, they have discussed about like interventions, specific interventions. The first intervention was, which I mentioned, that's drug and clinical drug development. Okay, development. Okay, under this first we discussed about, that is 7.2.1 thing. Okay, the first thing what we discussed about the phases of clinical. So we discussed about the aims of clinical trial and phase of clinical trials. Okay, the second thing they have mentioned is about the ethical regulation, ethical considerations. First, ethical considerations they have given. First, the general ethical consideration, that's all clinical trials should be scientifically sound, ethical, and scientifically sound and ethical. Okay, and they have discussed that the sponsor, researcher, institution, ethics committee, researcher, they are responsible, and before any clinical trial we should have an adequate preclinical data. Then they have discussed these ethical considerations specific with respect to different phases, in different specific ethical considerations with respect to specific phases of clinical trial. Under phase 1 they have written that this phase 1 it requires, if I have to carry out the phase 1, it requires ethical committee approval and regulatory authority approval. And as this phase 1, this is non-therapeutic trial, so it should be conducted in participants who give voluntary informed consent to themselves and a written sign. And if clinical trial, as clinical trial is often, it's the participants are healthy participants, so compensation must be given. But in case the phase 1 is also carried in disease, or we can say patients patients like if we do phase 1 study of anti-cancer interventions or drugs in cancer patients, so we can also in these kinds of patients we can also, the phase 1 participants, we can include patients, and compensation and study protocol. So the researcher or the research team, they should mention clearly about in the study protocol, they should mention and describe any kind of measures so we can minimize any sort of risk which are attributed to phase 1 study. Then this was about phase 1, these things, ethical guide, that's ethical considerations. Then we will see about the phase 2. So you can take the screenshot of this. So phase 1 study unit, it should be robust. First, if you look here the outline, because why I'm focusing on it, because so that you can remember it in a chronological way. So first we have discussed general. This is section 7. It's city clinical trials of drugs and other interventions. And then the first we have discussed the general principle for clinical trials. The second topic here we discuss about the clinical trial drug and vaccine development. Under this topic, first we discussed that first topic we discussed about the aims of clinical trials and phase of clinical trials. Then second is here, second subsection under this topic is ethical considerations. So ethical considerations we discussed in the previous we discussed it before a while. And then at the last I wrote one guideline as per this ICMR. So they have discussed that the study protocol, they should mention it's the study protocol, it should clearly mention if any risk associated with phase 1 trial is there, and they should mention the measures in order to decrease the risk attributed to phase 1. And then the ICMR have given a box, ICMR guideline documents, they have given a box. In the box they have mentioned the ways or the attributes by which we can decrease the risk associated with phase 1. So they have mentioned that is the first thing. They have mentioned that exclusion of patient who may be at increased risk. So we have to exclude we have to exclude those patients who are at increased risk. For example, like liver failure patients, any other kind of patients who have the increased tendency to develop a risk. Okay, so we have to exclude those patients like childbirth, pregnancy, all these things. Then we have to be. Then they have also written that there should be a careful review of investigational procedure. There should be the careful review of investigational procedure posing high risk of physical harm. The procedure which we follow during the trial, phase 1 trial, that we should review it thoroughly, and we have to like find out if there is any kind of like procedures which may have risk. So we have to find out those things. Then they have also written that evaluation of available data. So we have to evaluate the preclinical data which is available, and then based on the preclinical studies or pre-studies, we have to decide whether this investigation product or the procedure is safe and appropriate. Okay. Then on the last, I have mentioned it, there's careful monitoring of participants. So during the trial, we have to carefully monitor the participants and also interventions. And then they have also mentioned that is the phase 1 study unit. It should be robust. It should have robust resource and procedures. So phase 1 study unit, while the phase 1 clinical trial will be going on, that unit, it should be having a robust resource and procedures for immediate resuscitation and maintenance of basic life support. And then they have also written that phase 1 of phase 1 of high risk IP, phase 1 of high risk investigational product, such as in human biological, should be carried out in the hospitals. Like any phase 1, any investigational product which is having high risk, these phase 1 trials, they should be carried out in like hospitals. They should be carried out in hospitals where the experienced facility like physicians and doctors will be there. And then they have written that the medical pharmacologist or physician trained in clinical pharmacology should be involved in the phase 1 trial. So that's the medical pharmacologist and physician trained in clinical pharmacology should be there during phase 1 clinical trial. So this was about the ethical consideration regarding phase 1, and they have also discussed about the ethical. You can take a screenshot of this. They have also discussed about the ethical considerations about phase 2, 3, and 4. So after this, so we will write it some of the important ethical considerations which ICMR 2017 document have mentioned. Then we will conclude this lecture, and then in the next video we will discuss the remaining things. So if we phase 2, 3, and 4, they have discussed it. The ICMR document have discussed it together. So they have mentioned like all phase 2 and 3rd require ethical approval. It requires ethical committee approval. Ethical committee approval, and if applicable, regulatory authority approval. Okay. In case of phase 4 study, the following are the example of study that require ethical approval. So for example, in case of phase 4 trial, some following examples, there are some examples which also require ethical approval. Following studies require ethical approval. So among them, first we have, like, so in case of phase 4 studies which require ethical approval, or phase 4 clinical trial, and then they have mentioned that it's outcome research and registries, data that is used to answer any research question, and this is the important, fourth one is important. Okay, this is important. For example, new route, or if the intention of the researcher is to find out the new route of already approved phase 3 drug. This is the important thing, that's if the intention of the researcher is to evaluate any new route, or we can say new use route of administration, dose, or we can say dosage form, or combination regimen of a marketed drug, regimen of a marketed drug regimen of a marketed drug for non-commercial purpose, commercial purpose, such as academic research, So in case of see here what I have written here, that phase 2 and phase 3 as per ICMR section 7 clinical trial guidelines, 2017 guidelines, for phase 2 and phase 3 for clinical trial for phase 2 and phase 3, their ethical committee approval should be there, and also that's if that's regulatory authority approval. And for phase 4 of clinical trial, in this following studies, they also require ethical approval. They have first mentioned that phase 4 CT. I don't understand this, why have they written, and what's the actual what's the actual thing they want to specify here. So then this is from this, that's from point third, that's outcome research, registries, and data which answer any research question. These things, phase that's point number second and point number fourth. This is easy to understand, but 3 and 4 especially why they have mentioned this. So generally they have already written it in the headline, that is, in the phase 4 following studies require ethical approval. First they have given again phase 4 clinical trial, and outcome research, and then third they have mentioned the registries, fourth the data, and any data which gives answer relating to any research question, And this is important here, that's any research, if the intention of any researcher is to evaluate any new route, new use, new indication, new dosage form, or combination regimen of a marketed of already marketed drug for non-commercial purpose like academic purpose. So this is important thing. Also, if a marketed product phase for, in addition, they have written that phase for clinical trial on drugs with a market authorization of less than 4 years requires regulatory approval also. So any marketed product which is having uh, the duration of which is having a duration of less than 4 years, they also require ethical approval. So this is all about phase 2, phase 3, and phase 4 studies about the that's ethical considerations. So once again, I will tell you from the beginning. That's there. So I can conclude this lecture. So what we actually discussed in this topic. So in this lecture, in this video lecture, we discussed about the section 7, that's clinical trial of drugs and other interventions as per ICMR 2017 guidelines. So then we discussed first that's the general clinical trial principles. So what are the principles, general principles we need to follow during any clinical trial? Then second, we learned here that's a clinical drug and vaccine development. So under this topic, that's the clinical trial. First, we discussed about the clinical trial. Okay, that's the general principles regarding the clinical trial. Then second, we gave the definition of what's the clinical trial. Then we gave the definition. Under definition, we got that in this clinical trial, it can be conducted any kind of interventions. The intervention could be drug, vaccine, phytochemical, surgical intervention, medical devices, and then next we discussed about specific with related to interventions. The first intervention was this clinical trial, drug and vaccine development. So under this, we defined first what is the clinical trial and vaccine development. What are the aims of clinical trials of drug and vaccine development, and what are the phases of clinical trials. And then second, we learned about the ethical considerations with respect to clinical trials, and with respect to general clinical trial, and then with respect to specific phase of clinical trial. So in the upcoming videos, we will we will be discussing the other important chapters which is mentioned in this which is mentioned in the section 7 of clinical trial of drugs and other interventions. So first intervention in this video, we mentioned the first intervention, that is clinical drug and vaccine. In the upcoming videos, we will learn about the other kind of interventions like bioavailability and bioequivalence studies, and other kind of important interventions which are necessary for our clinical research and necessary for in case of interview or viva. So that will be discussed. Okay, do subscribe my YouTube channel and share it with those who really want it. Okay, thank you so much.